So my name is Jos. I'm a co-founder of Nextcloud, and I talk about Nextcloud, aka I do marketing. And today I'm going to talk about what's new in Nextcloud. Now, this became a little bit of a mess because we usually do about 3 releases a year. And I kind of made up 3 releases here, but there are actually only 2. I just mixed up our own product naming. So that was a good one. I hope nobody is confused, but we'll simplify it going forward. So I will simply go over the product and what's new. As I said, I can't talk about all the features because this is just what's new, which is already, as I said, 84 slides, although we're already on the 3rd, so we'll get there. Don't worry. I'll do my best at least. So, Nextcloud Hub 2, there was somewhere in March, April. We introduced user migration. That's the first thing I'm going to show. File locking, automated file locking. Lower database load, always performance. That's always important, I think. Improvements in talk, desktop integration, and a couple of improvements in the groupware app. Now, I'm going to try and show a couple of these things, but there's not a lot to show of user migration. It basically does what the name suggests. You can export your account. This depends a little bit on what the app supports. So we have support in a couple of the important apps, like, for example, files. And it'll, of course, not just export your files, but also the comments on the files, activity history, what your favorite files are. So these metadata gets exported. Of course, your account itself gets exported. So, you know, your profile name and picture and date, all this stuff. And the idea is that you can export your account and then go to another Nextcloud server and import it there. As Nextcloud is hosted by tons of companies, as well as on your own. And if you say, look, my Raspberry Pi isn't pulling it anymore, I need something a little faster, then you can move to something bigger. So, apps need to support this, so it has some limitations, but you can just choose what you want to turn on. So you can say, okay, export only my files, or export files and my email configuration, export this, don't export that. It's fairly simple, just download to a zip file. So what else is new? In Nextcloud Files, we worked a ton on performance. I'll get to that in a minute. We introduced a search API for indexing. That's basically an API for an external indexing tool, like Elasticsearch, that can then index the content on Nextcloud and show it to you. Somebody from Open Project there looks very happy. Excellent. And we introduced kind of a little thing, but if you share something by mail, you can then give it a password and then email them the password. But of course, well, they already have something kind of unique, which is their email address. So we now have a token option that they can simply say, hey, I have this email address. They will receive a time token, and then they can log in. You don't need to give them a password or something like that. So I mentioned performance, and there are tons of things, basically too much to talk about. So I have a couple of details that I just semi-randomly picked out. If you view a folder, in this release, we got the number of database queries down by 75%. You can configure cron jobs, so you have this background jobs that are running, and you know, if you have a very busy server and the cron job hits just at your most busy time, that might not be helpful. So these background jobs you can now configure a little bit, that you say, hey, this is a very heavy task, please don't do this at like 11 o'clock or at 9 o'clock when all the employees log in, for example. So there's a bit more configurability there. And it also turned out that our server was very busy generating avatars in different sizes. Like one application for Nextcloud said, can I have it at 65 by 65 pixels? The next one wanted 66 by 66. This is actually a ton of work. So we now just offer it in a few sizes, and then you know, you can resize it in the browser. I mean, that works fine. And that made quite a difference. You'd be surprised. What we also did is we separated image preview generation. So if you have, you know, 100,000 photos, and you want to scroll in that folder, then the Nextcloud server gets very, very busy generating about 100,000 previews in, of course, multiple sizes. If you do that in advance, that's very nice, but then that means your server is simply busy at another time. So what you can do now is you can have an external service that does this. So it runs on a separate server, it doesn't bog down your primary Nextcloud server. It's little things, makes quite a difference. Now, I mentioned file permissions, so one thing we also did is just we made the permissions a little more, well, advanced, and you can very specifically pick out if you don't just give edit rights, but you can say I want give the ability to upload, but not edit, or not delete, etc. So, other improvements were like searching for files by the tag of the file, improved group folders, you can now use the viewer app on public links. So you share somebody a PDF or an image, and then they can use our internal viewer app on that public link, and lots of other little things there. So the next step in Nextcloud Hub 2 was groupware. We did just a couple of features, a lot of under the hood work. The features are just a few. One is accept and decline directly in the calendar app. That just makes it a little quicker. You already then see the calendar item. You can just accept it and decline it. What we did in the mail app is we introduced the ability to send an email later and to undo send. So you have 30 seconds to realize that, well, you were a little too quick with that email. In Talk, we did again under the hood work, also introducing reactions, which is of course always nice to zoom into. Then we did a media tab, and we integrated a desktop client. So when you get, Talk notification, you can click there. In the latest version of the desktop client, this is even better, because if you get like this operating system notification, you can just click reply there, and then right there already answer. At least it works on Mac OS. I think on Windows, I'm not sure if Linux has that feature. Maybe not yet, but it's kind of cool. And well, here's the obligatory zoom in. With this release, we introduced a new user interface in Nextcloud Office. So, well, I think it's fairly obvious. We tried to make it a little more familiar for people who are migrating from certain other Office applications. It's optional. You can configure it as user. But I think this, just makes it nicer. Honestly, I like the UI a bit more myself. I use it now. So less menus to search through. And a nice thing is we introduced file locking already a while ago. So if you're working with somebody else and it's like not a file you can edit in Nextcloud, but it's a Photoshop file, for example, you need to download it, edit it. I'll get back to how we make that easier to later. But with this release, we made file locking automatic. So if you're in Nextcloud Office, you edit a file, then it gets locked so that your colleague isn't on the desktop client locally editing it at the same time and creating conflicts. But instead, desktop client will then say, this file is being edited online, please don't edit it locally. Depends a bit on the operating system whether a desktop client can enforce this or only give warnings, because on Windows it's impossible to edit a file which is open. On Linux this is not a problem because it's a proper operating system. But it gives you a warning then, so at least you know that you're breaking something. And then you can of course also right click on the file on desktop client and lock the file. It shows you who has locked the file. If it's locked by an application, it'll not say the name of whoever it was, but it'll say the name of the application, so you can see our Nextcloud text is locking this file, so people are editing it on the browser. Then of course, a desktop client can just right click and say open in the browser. Then it just opens the browser window with that file immediately editing, so you can just join the editing session. So it shouldn't block you for anything. That was already Hub 2. I'm going to get to the next one. This has a few more slides than the other one, and also a lot more features. Well, you can read. I'm just going to show it to you. So first thing we did actually was to introduce a new design. So, well, it's more rounded, and it also shows you your wallpaper through. So people can, pick a favorite wallpaper, and then you can see through this wallpaper. Another benefit, let me see, we're back. Another thing is we also worked a lot on accessibility, so you have a even nicer dark mode. You can also set fonts for people who have problems with reading, dyslexia. Dark mode can also switch automatically now, and a whole ton of other changes. If you use a different background, I can show you some more screenshots. If you like it bubbly, maybe you like it a little darker, that's for the real hackers, dark mode with a dark background. I now realize that even though I'm not a hacker, I do run this background by default. I like it. Either way, what we also did is once again performance. I can once again, of course, go in all the details, but let me quickly first cover security, which we also work on for every release. If you use a server-side encryption, we allow you to encrypt S3-based primary storage, object storage. Encryption now works with group folders, which are used a lot. And it takes 33% less storage. So it used to be that our encryption algorithm really blew up the size of the files by about a third, and now, that's gone, so it gets smaller again. And a couple of OCC commands to manage the encryption. On the client side, we also made a bunch of improvements. So if you use our end-to-end encryption in the desktop client and the mobile clients, it's faster. That was very helpful. A lot of people complained with a lot of files it was slow, which it was. We also made key management a little nicer, so you can also in the browser reset your keys. That also means you lose access to all your files if you forgot your password. but you can start over if you made a mistake or forgot your password. And administrators can then say groups of users or individual users can give them access to the end-to-end encryption or not, so it can be controlled as well. I mentioned performance. There was tons of stuff. I think in core alone we did 33 separate improvements. I'm not going to show all of them. I'm just going to pick out a few of them. Otherwise it gets a little crazy. So sorting of files went a ton faster because we only sort the recently changed files. It's a little thing, but if you're in a folder with tons of files and you want to sort all of them, why would you do that if you just need to sort the newest on top? Only look at the newer files. It's little things, but it gets a lot faster. Search became about 7 times faster, and all these things, they add up, because by now if you do a prop find, which is a kind of operation that a client checks, hey, has anything changed on the server, that is now about 30% faster. So you know, it's really common operations. They don't get, of course, a 7 times speed up, but all these 7 times and little things, they add up to, well, 20-30%. If you upgrade to this release, you should really notice it, because pages load about 1/3 faster, and I think that's kind of where you notice a difference yourself. So anyway, that's really good stuff there. Now let's talk about the features. Nextcloud Talk. So we introduced polls. I mean, that's really nice. Also a couple of other things. For example, you now have what we call widgets. If you share a deck card, you can then see the information of the deck card. This also works with GitHub tickets. It works with YouTube videos. It works with tons of other stuff, even maps, locations and such. And that also shows in the media bar on the site that we introduced in the previous release. So I think that's really quite nice. We introduced the ability to basically start a call, but not send a notification to everybody. So if you're in a big group and you want to have a call with only 3 members, you can start a call, but then not for 60 people, their phone starts ringing. That might be a little annoying. And you can do the same with sending messages. So you can send a message, but if you do this Saturday night, you shouldn't bother your entire team. They all get a ping on their phone because it's bloody weekend. Why do you do this? Maybe you shouldn't be working. But if you do, then at least you can send it without generating notifications. Of course, in Nextcloud, you can also configure your availability and just say, outside of these hours, please put me automatically in do not disturb. That also helps. But still, you can control this. But then, of course, you might actually want to send somebody call notification because you're in the call with 3 people and you want number 4, then you can actually ring their phone this way directly. So all the way around. We also introduced message expiration. The widgets that I just already mentioned also works then with YouTube. But you can also directly now create files, and a ton of different ones. The poll I already mentioned, but also create a new document, and then it just opens up, is immediately shared with everybody. You can immediately start editing your Office document or whatever you created. So that's nice. And in a classroom or a webinar, you might sometimes want to stop people from talking, and we expanded the access rights with this as well. So you can now say, okay, you know, you can't post messages, you cannot react, you know, no talking until, well, it's time to open that. We also worked on scalability quite a bit. We introduced clustering to the high-performance backend, so for bigger calls, but honestly, we don't use a clustering ourselves. We're now using it for webinars. We had 350 people a couple of weeks ago, so that works still on one server. But there is, of course, a point that you want to have a call with even more people, and then you need clustering, and that's helpful. All right, let's talk about GroupVer for a minute. This always makes for nice screenshots, so we introduced a nice org chart in our contacts app. You just define who is the boss of who, and then it creates a graph that you can zoom in and out and all this stuff. It's very simple, but it's nice. It was done by a community project, was supported by the EU, so yay for our EU overlords here in Brussels. Yeah, the mail app also got a nice overhaul, mostly UI improvements. I'll get to a couple of features in a minute. Well, that's actually right now, so less than a minute. You can have now images in your signatures. You can configure an autoresponder directly in Nextcloud. And we made the UI of the appointment booking. So this is kind of like Calendly, I guess. That's been a feature in Nextcloud for a while, and we improved the UI a little so you can create certain dates and times, and then people can book meetings with you. You also updated the create new account wizard. Attachment viewer is now right in mail, so if you have a PDF, just click it, you can view it. IMAP invite support, so in an email you get an invitation for the calendar, you just click accept, and then you're in there, etc. So all good stuff. Let's get to Office, as I have less than 10 minutes left. I know, it's terrible. So what did we do? Yeah, you can upload custom fonts. That's actually super helpful because half the documents that look shit in Collabora Online / Nextcloud Office just look bad because of the fonts. It's very simple. In many cases, that's the problem with it. And well, you can now easily add your fonts in the UI. What you can also do is if a document still looks bad or if it uses like really weird features that require like local data connections between documents and this stuff, there's now a button on the top left that says Open Locally. You click on it, it says, are you sure? You say yes, if you are. And then it'll just lock the file, open it on your desktop in Microsoft Office, for example, or LibreOffice on your desktop. You edit it, you close, it syncs it back to the server and unlocks the file. This is awesome. Perfect compatibility because whatever you run locally works. Obviously, this also works for your Photoshop files. So you just go in Nextcloud, you look up the file, you click the three-dot menu, you click Open Locally, Photoshop opens. When you're done, you close it, it unlocks the file again, and your colleagues can work again with it too. So fairly simple. The button is like the one there next to the Save button, the third one, top left. Right. We also have this app called Collectives. It's a knowledge base application. We introduced a whole bunch of improvements, like an outline that you see on the left here, and well, tons of other stuff. Honestly, I need to speed up a little bit, so I will skip through most of this, but it's a lot of good stuff. Believe me, you can add mention colleagues, you can search for the content of these things in universal search, and the widgets work as well. So you can, if you have a link to a GitHub issue or to a YouTube video, then it just shows you right there the content. And here are the fonts, by the way, I just mentioned, so you can upload them nice and easy. Nextcloud Photos, really cool. We introduced photo albums, so you can create a photo album and put photos in there without having to, you know, actually move them around. You can invite other people to it and share them with them. Then we introduced image recognition, so there's an AI neural network thingy. No, we're not sending it to Google. It's running local on your server, and it'll recognize different objects. It'll recognize different faces, different people, tags them, and then you can find them by tags. I'll show you a bit more screenshots later. Super cool. Also introduced the photo editor, so you can rotate, crop, and some filters, all the basic stuff for your photos. So Google killed photos, so you can move over now. I was trying to, well, I have lots of more zoom instincts, but you have a nice uploader now that shows you, here are the faces that it automatically recognizes, and then you can click one, and then you go, well, and you see all the pictures of that person. Yeah, it's fairly simple. Can even recognize music genres, obviously not in the Photos app, but in the Music app, to be clear. But it's really cool, and again, it's not using a database, it's using machine learning. So it really looks, well, listens in this case, and figures out the genre. I don't know how good it is. I've heard it's actually surprisingly good. So, really cool. And again, all this is on your server. No data is sent anywhere else, unlike the big clouds. It even works on a Raspberry Pi. So that's pretty cool, I think. On the clients, we really did a ton of work for this release. You can, of course, edit files also on your tablet, right? Nextcloud Office will work on your tablet, on your phone, etc. But we also introduced widgets. So you have these widgets when you open Nextcloud, you have the dashboard. These widgets are now also on your tablet and on your phone, if you want them. They use the native widgets, the iOS widgets. You have these widgets on iOS, where you can have Nextcloud widgets from your dashboard, on your phone, on your tablet, etc. Really cool, I think. I think I have some examples here, exactly. So your files, notifications, changes, files shared with you, etc. On Windows, you now get this. So if you have a virtual file system on Windows, so you're not syncing all the files, but you view them, and when you click them, they get synced. But at least you get previews in the meantime. That's new as well. Quite nice. Android, few improvements, iOS improvements as well. I will not go into details because we are really getting there. Yeah, those were the widgets. Two other nice things in the last 2 minutes I think I have left. We made it a lot easier to get Nextcloud. So there has been a Docker image for Nextcloud for a long time. And this was a kind of IKEA-inspired Docker image, I would say. You had to bring your own database and your own file system and your own, so you're really setting up like a bunch of Docker images. It's very nice if you're really into Kubernetes and that stuff. If you've never heard of Kubernetes, like most people, we now have an all-in-one Docker image. You just download this one Docker image and, well, it'll give you a nice overview. It runs all the other containers in there. It's super easy to use. We even did because we made a VM version of it, just a VM with then this Docker image running in it on Ubuntu, I think. Which you can then run on Windows if you want. So now suddenly Nextcloud is available for Windows Server, if you so wish. It's still running Linux, obviously, right? It's not going crazy here, but even has backup, by the way, built in. Borg backup. There is, by the way, a Nextcloud backup app, but that's using something completely different. That allows you to back up to another Nextcloud server. Time's up. I have to tell you, by the way, that you can deploy this all-in-one container with one click on these platforms. So if you really love the cloud, but you want a little more control, you can still run Nextcloud on any of these with 1-2 clicks, and then you have it deployed there. So we're in their app stores, basically. Not all of them are fully finished yet, but we're working on it. We'll get there. Anyway, questions? Sorry. Only a few seconds over time. It's not so bad. Questions? Come on.
Co-authoring.
Yeah. Sorry?
Co-authoring.
Co-authoring of a document. So you mean collaborative editing?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So in Nextcloud Office, but also Nextcloud Text, so note-taking, and also the knowledge base. So if you're editing a knowledge base document, you can do it with 20 people if you like. I mean, I don't know why you would.
The fact lines as well.
So, well, on iOS and the Android and iOS apps, they do it. But on the desktop client, not. It would open in a browser. So you do right-click, you say edit document, and it opens a browser window, and then you're in there. Yeah.
Does the knowledge base support Markdown?
Does the knowledge base support Markdown? Yes, it is Markdown. It dreams Markdown, it lives Markdown. Everything is Markdown, other than Nextcloud Office. But it's Nextcloud Text, but then in a different way. So it has these widgets and all the other stuff, just like text. They're basically, I don't know, it's like text, but then with a sidebar that lets you search and, choose and link to other documents. It's just text on steroids. Yes?
Can I talk with other servers?
Can you talk with other servers? Yes, multiple ways, but Nextcloud has a federation feature, so you can share a file to the server of your friend.
Talk.
Yeah, so Nextcloud Talk. No, at the moment Talk is not federated. It's something we want to do, but I don't have an ETA for you. Next.
Is the photo add-on, is it an odd add-on or
The Photos app is the default Photos app with the recognition, everything, yes. Yeah. Yeah, for the recognition of faces, because you need to download a gigantic, AI thing file, there you need to separately install the Recognize app, and that's about, I don't know, I think it's a gigabyte plus, because it needs to download this network that can recognize your pictures on your server. It has ARM and x86, so it should work in most places, but this is a separate action, but the Photos app itself is there. Yes?
Collections use local content?
Collectives. You mean what do you mean with local content? You mean you can insert a file in there?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Yes, insert file document files from Nextcloud. Of course, if it's not on Nextcloud, it'll upload it and put it in a same folder. Yes.
In the Forms app, it is now possible to share the admin, so several people can edit the form or see the results?
No, not yet, but that's something we would want to do. So the Forms app, you have Nextcloud Forms app, it's like Google Forms, but then you're not giving all your data to evil America company. Yeah, and the question was, can multiple people see and manage the same form? And this is unfortunately not yet possible. So the person who creates the form, they can export the data in a spreadsheet, but they can currently not yet give management to other people. We'll get there. Yes?
You said something about the talk, having 500 people in the talk.
Yeah?
Can they all see each other?
No. How many people can see each other? So you can control access rights, and if you have infinite network bandwidth, then everybody can see everybody. In the real world, no. And it purely depends on your network bandwidth here.
But does the grid view of the talk app?
I think the grid view goes to 20 people or so. And beyond that, you start to scroll to the next page. But I believe it scales with the size of your monitor. So if you have a gigantic monitor on a high resolution, again, No, it's open source and it's self-hosted. You are always the limiting factor, believe me. It's, anything else?
We talked about the local talk client.
Local talk client.
What's available for Linux?
No, so we have Android and iOS client for talk at the moment, but stay tuned. That's it. Awesome. Thank you for being here, everybody.
It's self-hosted. You're always the limiting factor.